Hello, welcome again to RP-0 America. So here we are, gently floating in 0G. I guess nobody's floating, technically. We got no people, no crew. This is an uncrewed test of the Saturn V, which ended up launching the Gemini direct payload here. So we're currently in low Earth orbit, waiting for our Trans-Lunar injection, TLI. And I think this is Africa. We're just, we've only been in orbit for a pretty short period of time. It looks like an hour and 15 minutes to burn, so I just wanted to, I guess, give myself a little time to connect the previous video to this one, and we will now float through space, and you get to look at how pretty Africa is with, RSS and RSS. It's not RSS-VE currently, but it's, similar. I borrow Thason's configurations for scatterer, and, this is, what was it? RVE, yeah, that makes sense. RVE, visual enhancement, or whatever. Pretty clouds and everything. So you can see Africa and the clouds and the scatterer lights as we float around. So we're losing a little bit of liquid hydrogen as we go along. And this comes with a little bit of extra liquid hydrogen, but ultimately just has a bit of extra delta V such that this is much more than we need. We'll need about 3,100 meters per second of delta V, but you'll see us lose probably a few dozen meters per second as we coast around the Earth. So I'll just slow down just a little. Oh, weird. What's going on? Oh, is the launch pad getting ready or something? It felt like it was popping me out of warp. I don't know. There we go. And there's sunset. So unfortunately the color of the sun, this is my continuing complaint, the color doesn't shift through, but that's just because we're out in what is it, scaled space rendering versus PQS when you're on the ground and the sun can go through this nice color gradient as it sunsets. Video of sunset and sunrise from the space station is really beautiful. Unfortunately, you don't quite get that effect yet. And this is, of course, why I use ambient light adjust, because otherwise you'd barely be able to see the craft on the dark side here. So 42 minutes, we're losing little bits of delta V. This liquid hydrogen boils off very easily, even in the coldness of space. All right, 30 minutes to the burn. There we go, and we have sunrise and probably the Pacific Ocean, because the Pacific Ocean is really, really big. Oh yeah, and that makes sense, because just after launch, we were about around where the node would be. So whatever, 90 minutes. There's California, 3 minutes to burn. Oh, cool. So the burn will be happening over America, it looks like, more or less. Or maybe just east of America during the daytime. All right, 1 minute to burn. So I will pop out of time warp. So I'm already aligned, so I don't need to worry too much about that. So check the engine. It says very stable. That's kind of the whole point of these little packs. Let's see, yeah, space to activate them. So unfortunately hitting H doesn't, it pulses this RCS, but it's not pulsing these, I suppose because they're set up as engines, or maybe they would only activate if all the other RCS was off or something like that. But anyway, thankfully they're not necessary. In part, I think you see this tiny bit of thrust that's being provided here. I think that is actually enough to stabilize the fuel in this. It was actually intentionally set up that the venting gas from the liquid hydrogen, which was known to be boiling off in space. Oh, damn! I probably wanted to start that early. Oh well, let's burn now. All right, and that's going to crank up the engine. It should actually light up. All right, and I'll leave those on. Sorry, I should have centered that burn, of course, because if a burn is going to take about 6 minutes or whatever, that time is inaccurate. That 16 minutes, that's assuming that these are on, which of course they are, but they're anyway. I'm just going to ignore those numbers and just actually pay attention when this delta V runs out. You want to bracket so that half of your delta V is spent before the node and half of it after. And MechJeb carrying out the burn on its own would going execute node on its own would have done that correctly, but of course I didn't rely on it and I screwed up. Yeah, so the fuel would have to be stable, and then the engine can relight. So it still has one ignition remaining, but I don't actually need it. Just that NASA did actually test the J2 to confirm it could do more than one relight in space, just to confirm kind of the limitations of their design of the restarting system. And I think part of the limitation was how they could repressurize the tanks. They used liquid helium for some of the early Saturn V flights, I believe. Here, backspace to go. Backspace will focus on your active craft, so you can focus on it here. Yeah, it looks like the burn is happening right over Texas. So whatever this area is, I don't recall offhand. I'm sure I could really quickly look it up. Where they actually ended up constructing, testing and constructing, etc. The Saturn V first stage. I think they built all the test stands for them in the same place. I could be wrong. Actually, I think the second stage was it constructed in California, or am I crazy? I know this stage was constructed in California, and it was actually flown from California to Florida, which is just crazy, but true. And they might have constructed the second stage in California too. I'm not sure, but I know people also potentially correct me, and I'm sure I can just look it up. But I think Stennis Research Center, which is still one of the NASA facilities, had test stands to actually test fire the first and potentially second stage. I don't recall seeing if I ever saw image or video of the second stage being test fired or not, but that might be really challenging. I don't know. It's one of those things I don't recall well, versus where I've seen tons of pictures and read tons of, enough about, say, the testing and building of the Saturn V first stage that some of it has stuck around in my sieve of a memory. But the Saturn V first stage is so huge that seeing an image of it hauled into a test stand and lit is impressive. But these engines work in vacuum or low atmosphere, so I'm curious how a test of a J2 would work in atmosphere, like in a full test stand, let alone the second stage, the S2 stage, which has 5 of these engines. I'm not entirely sure how they'd go about testing that, but they might have just tested fueling procedures, and I don't know. I don't know every detail about that, just more than I probably should. Alright, and is that this is Florida over to the left. Sorry, I'll stop jumping around the camera because that's the thing I often do, and it probably makes some people nauseous or annoyed, and I know it kind of hurts the YouTube compression, because the less that's changing on the screen, the higher quality it makes the image appear. So this is Florida coming around again over here, and oh man, I used to remember these things. Is this the island of Hispaniola, or is that just Cuba, or are those the same thing? I don't think those are the same thing. I know enough that Cuba is its own island, and then there's, Haiti and Dominican Republic. Are those on the island of Hispaniola? I'm sure I'm pronouncing it terribly, but I mean, as long as I know the facts, I can figure out the pronunciation later and if necessary. So after the usage of this third stage to throw the payload towards the moon, we'll just be jettisoning it. There was the docking, the undocking and transposition, and then docking was carried out with the Apollo, because kind of what you see here with this cover, if you imagine a similar setup for the actual, for the Saturn with the Apollo payload, under that shroud would be the LEM, and then the Apollo capsule would eject, would come off, the coverings of this would pop off, and then it would turn around, grab the LEM, and extract it, kind of pull it off of the little hollow they had in the top of this third stage for it. There we go, and we are seeing Florida passing by. You can see much of the rest of America from this altitude. All right, so we're nearly done this burn. So this won't be perfectly accurate because I didn't set up the burn. I didn't execute the burn precisely. So even though we only have a kilometer left, we have a lot of altitude we need to go through. But that's kind of the magic of orbital dynamics. Most of the delta V is to get to this point, and then past here it's much easier to leave. To go even further from this. Like the further out you are, the less influence you will have from gravity, and therefore even the less force, thrust, speed, etc. you need to travel that last bit of distance. So let us focus on the moon so that we can catch it when it actually is displaying, because this is a predicted path, and what it actually shows our true path past the moon. So currently we will be passing, is that above? Yeah, I think that's above geostationary altitude, which is like 36,000 kilometers. So now we're up to 60,000 kilometers, and climbing and climbing and climbing. Again, we have plenty of delta V in this, so we shouldn't have too much trouble. It's just about precision with this, which is why I like to let MechJeb carry out a burn like this, because MechJeb is much more accurate and just on average is much more likely to cut off the burn at the right time than I am. Because as this goes out, we only have a few seconds of burn left, and this is going to move faster and faster and faster. Then I have to mash the key at just the right time and then correct, because whoa, oh, that's not too bad. That's not terrible. Okay, so if I remove this prediction, see, I didn't hit, it's only 10 times as far away from the moon as it had been predicting. So now if I hit H, so if I do just a little more push using the RCS, it's getting me further, closer to the moon. So I don't want to be wasting the RCS up here, so can I just lock, not that. If I lock those tanks, will those RCS not run? I think so. So now when I'm hitting, of course when I'm hitting H it's not actually, so if I shut down this engine to preserve that in case I need to use it. There we go, now it's using those, so it's producing a little bit of thrust using those. So now if I go look at the moon, am I getting closer? I am getting closer. Alright, cool. So I will just keep burning like that until we get closer. It's such a tiny acceleration provided by those packs. They're really just for like orienting the craft. The third stage plus the payload, and like pointing them in the right direction for a burn and providing ullage for the fuel before the burn we just did. Beyond that, they don't do much. They're very crucial, but they don't have to provide very much thrust at all. They just need to be very reliable. I think they store the fuel in like elastic bladders, so they don't have to, because it's kind of like a Goldberg machine, right? So to stabilize the engine for your trans-lunar injection, you need to, you're doing that to stabilize the fuel for that engine. You're doing that because fuel will float around in space. Well, okay, well, how do you provide fuel for the engine you're going to use to stabilize the fuel? You know what I mean? So those, so the engines I'm currently burning, these little APS hypergolic engines, they store the fuel in an elastic bladder, so they're not relying on kind of ullage or gravity to pull the fuel towards the pump. It's the fuel is stored in kind of like an elastic bladder, I believe. So closer and closer. So I think that's pretty close. That's pretty damn close to, oh right, I'm just coming at a time warp. That's not actually shutting off the engine. Sure, let's get to 100 kilometers and then leave it at that. I think that's going to be very nice, getting within 100 kilometers of the moon. I don't think it's probably not the closest we've been. I think we've crashed. We've landed things on the moon. Yes, the Agathorn lunar lander, where I was kind of demonstrating to Agathorn himself that you could build a lunar lander of a certain type. I think that was my previous video series, if I recall correctly. All right, so our path is now taking us very close to the moon. Oh, damn! It looks like it's currently it's going to be in a dark path of the moon. So now let's see if. So that was the extremely crucial burn towards the moon, the TLI. So I find that to be, I consider that to be a fairly entertaining part of that video. And now for the boring part of adjusting maneuver nodes. So ideally, I'd like us to be passing by the moon somewhere on the sunlit side. So I selected a maneuver node kind of partway to the moon, and see if I can do, weird, nope. See if I can do something in just a couple of delta V, which will, no, it doesn't look like it's going to be, like if I basically do the exact opposite of what I did, maybe. Okay, let's try that. Well, maybe not literally the exact opposite, but something like that. Because oh yeah, so if I go prograde -6, yeah, I don't know, if I can bring that a little closer to the moon by moving something else, then I could be on a sunny part of the moon. I just kind of want the burn to be well lit. This is purely for glamour. There's no operational reason that I want this burn to be on the in the sunlit part of over the moon. it is just so that my video looks prettier. Just like I feel like I was very lucky that this launch I was actually able to get relative inclination relative to the moon very low during the day, because most of the time, just Murphy's Law, most people's videos you see, including mine, of sending something towards the moon, it happens at night, because you don't get to choose when that happens. It just kind of depends which time of the month you're doing a launch, where your launch location is relative to the moon and the sun when everything's aligned. So actually that's pretty good. So if I can do a mid-course correction of a little over 10 meters per second, I could be over a sunlit part of the moon when at closest approach. So that is what I'm going to do. So this is more delta V than I currently have in these APS packs, and I've expended most of the fuel in those APS packs, so I'm going to ditch this stage. Sure, I probably should have done that before setting up that maneuver, but I mean, now I can technically look at these. So this is going to ditch that. This is going to light. Those are a couple liquid engines, and it's going to light a couple of solid engines, which are hopefully on the, looks like they're pointed on the payload, so that they throw the payload away from me. All right, is everybody ready? Oh, let me light up my screen just a little more. I dimmed it while I was away. There we go. All right, that was just for me, my actual local physical screen. So there we go. So we are separating. This is our actual payload, just about a little over 30 tons, that will be going towards the moon. And say goodbye to that beautiful stage which parked us in Earth orbit and threw us towards the moon. All right, so this must be the, oh yeah, you can still see bits of, oh cool, let's just take a nice look at South America, Brazil, very big Brazil there, as we head away from the Earth. And you can see now we're so high up. This is higher, I'd have to look at the numbers, but currently we're possibly as high as humans have been, other than the people who went towards the moon. There's a Gemini mission where they used, they docked with a kind of a spare engine, a target vehicle which had an engine, and used it to put the Gemini into an unusually high orbit for a Gemini mission or anything that wasn't an Apollo mission. And I think they got up to roughly this altitude, maybe just 1,600 kilometers, something like that. But yeah, imagine, just look how different the Earth looks from this altitude, whereas when we're so close to the surface in the parking altitudes we always go into. So this is a view that very few people have seen in person. Thankfully we have lots of satellites, with video cameras and photographic cameras. They can take pictures from higher altitudes and we can see those, but very few humans have actually seen Earth from that distance, and now even fewer people have seen the Earth from this distance, as it shrinks more and more as we head away. So we're losing a little bit of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen here, and these are for the fuel cells which are providing power for this, because it also, again, does not have solar panels. Also similar to the historic Gemini and the historic Apollo, we're using fuel cells to power this mission. All right, so we are about 15 hours away from that burn. So now that we've watched the lovely marble Earth recede into the distance, we'll let it recede a little bit more during the next 15 or so hours. Whoa, did I cover it up? Yes. And so now we are seeing just the nighttime side of the Earth. All right, so we're approaching. So hitting this maneuver node precisely isn't paramount. It's not. Science. Sure, let's just keep that so it doesn't bug me. Right now, thankfully, in my missions, I don't need science because I can only focus on relatively few things at a time mentally. So thankfully, I don't need to worry about capturing science and doing these world firsts. Oh, right, I need to unlock those tanks so that I can actually use RCS. All right. So these little engines, so if I hover over them, you'll see them highlighted. There's just a couple of little engines which are useful for ullaging, because the fuel is very unstable. Although it doesn't take too much to stabilize it. If you look, and I just pulse this basic RCS, that would stabilize pretty quickly. But these little engines will provide, these two little engines will provide ullage as well, and I think they might be able to pitch, and so they could actually provide the third axis of control that we'd like our craft to have. All right, so let me just point towards the blue arrow. towards our burn target. And then we will burn just a few delta V. Do we want to use the main engine? I think we're fine. Yeah, this main engine has it has many burns. It had to be an extremely reliable engine. It was crucial. Well, let's say look at a Saturn V. So the first stage has 5 engines. You could kind of get away with one engine failing later in that burn, you'd be okay. Same with the second stage, same story, right? They intentionally shut off one of the engines, but if, say, one of the other engines accidentally needed to be shut down, it would be a survivable mission. Now, the single J2 on that third stage was necessary to get into orbit, was necessary to do the Trans-Lunar injection, so it was very crucial. And then this engine on the Apollo service module was necessary to break into lunar orbit as well as to leave lunar orbit at the end of the mission and come back towards Earth. So vitally crucial engine needed to absolutely work, because if it didn't fail, you would strand people. Either they'd fly by the moon and head out into interplanetary space and be completely unrecoverable, or they would not be able to leave the orbit of the moon. Two very bad positions for your astronauts to end up in. All right, so we are pointed now. I think the fuel is, no, the fuel's not stable. All right, let's just ullage using the RCS, even though, so these two little engines, they are, Schaub's added those, but I do like the idea. I left them on because I like them. They do not need, they have 2 little tanks, I believe. They do not need the fuel to be ullaged. They use pressurized tanks, pressurized fuel, I believe. But let's just stabilize this, and yeah, sure, let's use this engine. I will hit space to activate it, although I could have done it through that menu. The fuel is stable, so let us crank it up, do that burn, and turn it off. So that engine provides a huge amount of thrust-to-weight ratio compared to a lot of things, including, say, my RCS and other things. So let me thrust forward just a little more, because I'd prefer not to be crazy close to the moon. Sure, 90 kilometers. All right, so we are now on a trajectory to fly by very close to the moon. So I'm pretty sure that's the Earth, and I'm not going to embarrass myself like I do every other time and try to find the moon in the sky when I'm so far away from it. So there I am in my spacecraft. Warp here. So 1 day, 19 hours to get closer towards the moon. See, I like doing that because we're going to be in time warp. We're going to be in time warp for a good bit of time, but I'm not going to just fly by the point that I'm trying to get to. Cool. Congratulations. The Alpha launch pad has reconditioned. That always pops up, and I always do not care. Oh, hey, the moon. All right. So let us get a little closer. So we're moving towards the encounter, or what's it? The sphere of influence change, because I'm thinking about it. So in the next version, like once I complete these crewed missions, this is an uncrewed mission towards the moon. Once I've actually landed humans on the moon, brought them safely to Earth, I'll consider that kind of the end of this series of missions, or season, if you want to think of it that way. And then I'll be taking a break from recording, and I want to set up a 1.2.2 or whatever version of KSP is. And I'm thinking of switching to using Principia, because it is a much more accurate model of gravity. I've experimented with it. It's great. I just need to kind of learn to use it a little better, but I've experienced with it a little bit. It's absolutely great. So Principia is made by Egg. It's like a math. I don't want to call him a math student, but he also doesn't like calling himself a mathematician, I don't think. Although I think he's actually graduating from his master's program or something soon. But anyway, he's a KSP modder, quirky guy from Europe who makes a mod that does a much more accurate model of gravity. Rather than using spheres of influence as stock KSP does, it kind of calculates multi-body gravity. It uses complex calculus estimations of the influence of that gravity of multiple bodies will have on your craft to give you a more accurate view of gravity. So here, when we're near the moon, right now the way it's modeled in KSP is we're now in the sphere of influence of the moon. In this reference frame, we are just ignoring the influence of the Earth's gravity, and we're under the influence of the gravity of the moon. Whereas in reality, you know, you go from being near the Earth and in low Earth orbit, say you're like 99% of like your orbit can be orbital behavior will be explained by the gravity between you and the Earth, and then as you get further out, you're being perturbed by the sun to some extent, by the moon, and the further and further you get out, the percentages shift, right? And at some point, you're close enough to the moon that the amount of actual force of the gravity pull by the moon is roughly equal to the gravitational pull from the Earth, and then you're kind of shifting between what you could use as like if you're trying to explain or tell a story, you'd call it a sphere of influence of the sphere in which one planet is the dominating influence. But it isn't like 100 in KSP as it is here. You know, you go from 100% influence of the moon to 100% influence of the Earth, whereas in reality, those are just percentages that shift fluidly. And long story short, Principia is a mod that much more accurately mathematically models that. And Egg has been taking great love, care, and attention to do that correctly and efficiently enough that it could be in a KSP mod, which is just awesome. And so I will probably play with that in the next season so that gravity is more accurately modeled. It'll make the things I'm doing at that point more challenging, like other missions to the moon or missions towards Mars, whereas a straight just home and transfer like I just did, or home and transfer from Earth to Mars, will probably need a little bit of adjusting. Anyway, it's a more accurate model of gravity, and it's another cool thing to talk about. So okay, 18 hours till closest approach, so I can probably do the burn that will put us into orbit of the moon before the end of this video. So that is what I will do. Alright, so we are now 51 minutes away from closest approach to the moon, so I'm probably close enough that I can find the moon in the sky. I did indeed. Awesome. I'm going to set up a maneuver node now that will put us into a circular orbit. There's a MechJeb option for this as well. I can just tell it to create a node to circularize, but I'm just doing it this way. So 126. So pull it down a little more. It doesn't need to be well. Actually, let's get it perfect, and then I can actually see if I can get MechJeb to carry this maneuver out. Because it's not too high pressure. If MechJeb like accidentally eats one of my ignitions, I should be fine, because I don't have people and I have many spare ignitions. So there we go, that's close enough to circular for me. Alright, so let us point towards our target node. Alright, so if you're unfamiliar with a lunar mission, I'll kind of do a quick rundown of the stages that would be carried out. So this hardware, it's currently in a flyby of the moon, which means it's going to get close to it, but we'll be moving too fast relative to the moon. We came in from outside of the sphere of influence of the moon, and we would leave basically the same way. Is it a hyperbolic orbit? Something like that. We're moving faster than, we have more energy than the escape velocity of lunar orbit. And so we need to slow down in order to end up in orbit of the moon. And so that is what we intend to do when we are at closest to the moon, so which will also mean we're moving the fastest relative to the moon, because we're kind of falling towards it, so you speed up when you're falling. Okay. And so that's when our engines will have the most impact. We'll be able to have the most influence on our velocity. And so that is when we will do the burn. So we are falling towards the moon. It's saying it's going to take 4 minutes. I suppose that seems fair. Roughly half of our delta V. Sorry about the camera shifty. I'm just trying to kind of follow the moon as we move in. So this is the scaled space, like the way the moon looks from far away. It's just a simple 2D painted image. And then soon we will move close enough to the moon that it will actually start rendering the surface and the craters and such in 3D using the PQS modeling system, which looks super cool. Especially since Kill Ashley helped us to fine-tune the colors and make things look nicer. So as you get closer, rather than it just being super obvious that you're really close to a lame 2D representation. Okay, let me just do a quick save here in case I screwed up and it screws up this maneuver. And I'll edge the fuel so that to stabilize the fuel for that. come on, there we go, and see if it will execute node, because it should light up the engine. Oh yeah, right, it's going to align a little more precisely. There we go. And seems... right, the fuel was no longer stable. That makes sense. So then it stabilized. I think MechJeb was made much more kind to realism overhaul recently. So appreciation to Sarbian for that. And it has a different logic path it follows. It checks, okay, should we do the burn? And rather than just kind of wasting the ignitions of it by saying, okay, are we at the right spot? Are we in the right orientation? Light up the engine. It will check to see if the fuel is stable, and if not, then it will kind of try to pulse the RCS and things to stabilize the fuel. So it behaves much nicer than it used to be. So in previous videos I talked about you kind of having to be careful so that you didn't waste or lose ignitions. That is no longer the case. That is, or at least to me, that no longer appears to be a problem. All right. So with this craft, we're getting a full 1/3 of a G of acceleration from this, which is a lot. After this craft has been floating in 0G for about 3 days, that is a substantial amount of G-force for a crew to feel on their backs. Thankfully, they're not in there right now, and thankfully it's on their backs, by the way, because of where the engine is relative to where the crew is. It's if can't quickly come up with an example of a situation in which this would happen, but let's say there was a vehicle that was docked to this and the crew is in that, right? So they're sitting with their backs in the opposite of the direction they would have in here if you imagine the chairs where the chairs would be. It would be called eyeballs out acceleration. So from their perspective here, they feel like they're kind of lying on the floor, say, right? If you're being pushed, accelerated from behind like this. So in eyeballs out acceleration, you feel like you're being hung from the roof at 1/3 of a G of gravity. That's the way I like to think about it. All right, so it's kind of automatedly carrying out this burn. So I'm just cranking up time warp so it can carry it out. So you have to bleed off a lot of fuel to go from to going from Earth to getting close enough to the moon, to be this close to do a flyby, and then you have to burn a great deal of fuel to get into orbit of the moon. And doing this with a craft big enough to carry people takes a lot of fuel, which is why it took so much money and time and effort to develop the hardware for that. Just if you look at the amount of fuel, the mass of this craft before and after that burn, we just burned tons of fuel, and that fuel had to be carried from the surface of the Earth, and then that fuel had to be carried from low Earth orbit to here. So it's a monumental effort just to get a craft to this point, just in orbit of the moon, and then to be even more ambitious and make a craft that could actually land on the moon. Well, America did a pretty special thing. All right, so I'll just do a quick save here. Here we are in the orbit of the moon. And next video, we will be attempting to land this craft on the moon. So we will be expending some of the remaining fuel that this engine has access to. And then there will be, of course, like a little Russian doll, there's another engine hidden inside here with more fuel. So hopefully we are able to land. Thanks for watching RP-0 America. Goodbye.